Moving on to item number 9, which is our natural environment targeted rate for Q2, and I'd like to invite Gail and Phil. Thank you. Just while you make your way up here, I just want to acknowledge the teams that you both work with who are engaged in much of this work, and particularly for our Rachel Kelleher and her team working with Phil Brown on the Waitakere Ranges kauri dieback issue. We're now going through the consultation on the track openings, and this is fairly intense work, and I just want to publicly acknowledge our staff who are involved in that. Thanks, Gail.
Kia ora koutou. Very exciting to be here this morning and joined by Phil Brown, who's our biosecurity manager, to answer any biosecurity related questions that you might have. But it's a really exciting time in the delivery of the targeted rate. We're at the point now where we've got in the order of about 50 either new or upscaled environmental projects that we're delivering with the targeted rate, and that falls across the 9 different work program areas that I've spoken about before to this committee. So if you look across the programs, that represents, depending on the program, between about a 2- and 6-fold increase on previous delivery and associated outcomes before the targeted rate was supported. It has its challenges in that what we're doing this year in particular, recognising that it's an election year, we're trying to scale up as quickly as possible with what we call immediately expandable quick wins. So work that we know will deliver the most effective ecological outcomes that we can start on immediately in comparison to other projects within other programs, where as part of the scaling up, remembering that this is a 10-year program of work, we have to do additional scoping to make sure, for example, that we've got the right methodologies at that expanded scale, and also procurement as part of this as well, that we're using the appropriate scale and expertise of larger contractors to come in and deliver across that 10-year program. So we're doing those pieces of work in parallel, and in parallel with that, we're also recruiting and inducting and embedding a number of new staff within environmental services, but also remembering that this program of work is cross-council. So we've got new staff resources in environmental services, community facilities, parks, and also REMU working alongside of us to deliver these projects. I wanted to point out some of the key priorities across that work program, and the first one is extremely important. It's early days. I've got a bit more detail later in the presentation about how we're working with mana whenua, with some really useful advice from the Independent Māori Statutory Board on how we make sure that this targeted rate provides us an opportunity to not only improve our natural environment, but to maximise outcomes for our mana whenua. So I'll talk a bit about that in a few minutes. Obviously, accelerating the tracks is a key driver of our priorities. The targeted rate was passed on the back of the kauri dieback concern, and as you all know, that's an important priority for yourselves and Aucklanders. We're finalising the Regional Pest Management Plan. The Regional Pest Management Plan is essentially our rulebook for biosecurity. So it's equivalent to the unitary plan for pest animal and pest plant control. So that's going to come in front of this committee in March, and that's an important anchor, if you like, for defining the rules that we're operating within to deliver the program. And then this other one's really important as well, to focus. We've got to make sure that we're not only doing the work, but we're spending the time telling the stories. Again, conscious that in a year, but this year in particular, as a election year, making sure, and our comms support teams internally have been great, but I still think we need to do more on this front to make sure that we get the stories out there, about and help you get the stories out there about the work that we're doing. So that's raising the awareness. This material is in the report that you have for this discussion. So I'm not going to go over the detail of all of these projects. I'll pick out a few points. I've spoken about the kauri tieback upgrade work. That's important, and you will know that we've started to open tracks in the Waitakaris, working alongside our colleagues in parks. And the first one was the Kirikiri Falls, which was opened on the 26th of December. We've also carried out last year's 1080 program, building in the buffer areas, which is actually really important to protect our investment for pest control. So what we're expecting, having done the pest control not only within the Hanua ranges, but with some of the expanded buffer area, that the significantly reduced, close to zero initially, pest numbers will last longer because we won't have the reincursion coming through from those buffer areas. In terms of the marine and island side, we've got a range of projects. This is just a subset of them. There's a lot more described in that report. But a lot of these, as you see, focused on not only doing the work, but actually some of the awareness raising that I spoke about. For example, in the last slide, there was the 30 ambassadors on kauri dieback stationed at the tracks. And in this one, there's 9 ambassadors stationed around the waterfronts to try and raise awareness of the opportunity for anyone going to the islands to know what's at stake and what they can be doing to prevent incursions on the islands in the Gulf. Then the community action, I should say before I leave that marine, this also covers just the island and the reincursion work. There's quite big programs which are listed in the report on marine biosecurity. So that's the organisms in the water column, things like Mediterranean fanworm, and also our marine ecological program. For the community work, the thing I wanted to point out here is that we're making some changes. We're expanding some of the key grant funding opportunities for community groups, but we're also co-designing the 10-year program with some of those community groups. Are very aware that we don't want to be sitting in Bledisloe trying to second guess what the community groups are seeking from us. So we're working alongside those groups to develop those programs. With respect to the Maori outcomes, there's a few initial areas that we're developing there, based, as I said, on some useful feedback from IMSB, in the sense of the mana whenua having an aspiration for natural environment outcomes to not only be involved in what we're delivering, but to exercise their rangitiratanga responsibilities and we're working with them in partnership, but in some cases make sure that we're actually setting up projects through the targeted rate that are Maori-led and delivered. And along the same lines, we're involving Kaitiaki as part of the executive and advisory decisions for the targeted rate delivery. And then we're doing the work that's been going on for a while now in council, which is taking opportunities. The example I often use is Project Hanua. So working rohi by rohi with the iwi and looking for opportunities for iwi representatives to be involved in our projects as kaitiaki guardians, for example, in the track clearance in the Hanua. But beyond that, I think there's an opportunity with the targeted rate to be much more intentional and build a structured program of capacity and capability building across our iwi representatives. Because one of the challenges that we have as an organisation, I think, is there's currently a bit of an asymmetry between the resources and the expertise that sits within council and our community groups and the expertise that sits across our iwi. So we're talking to IMSB and also the Kaitiaki forum within council about how we can address that over the long term so that we can really move forward with mana whenua as co-partners in the delivery of natural environmental improvements. And then the final one up there, which was suggested by the Kaitiaki forum that we met with, which I think is a really good idea, to build in as an anchor not only our biophysical changes and our ecological changes, but also key performance measures that reflect Mātauranga Māori through the program. This just covers some of the key risks. I touched on the capacity earlier in terms of staff, not just in ES, but across council, delivering both the quick wins and also making sure that we're effectively scoping the 10-year program. So that really is around us working together as a council team and more broadly. Some of the very aligned partners, I've spoken quite a bit about mana whenua, but Department of Conservation are another key partner in delivery of this program. The other risk that I haven't covered that's up there is the market capacity. We are coming across some market constraints in a few areas. One is the track upgrade work, which is actually a lot more specialised than it looks in terms of managing the hydrological regimes as we change the tracks. And the other one is just the biosecurity pest control expertise that exists across Auckland. I was talking to a staff member yesterday and he's trying to outsource a piece of work that's in the order of 100,000 to set our baseline monitoring program for Waitakere ranges. So that's current state for rat, possum and feral pig numbers. And there's quite a bit in that in terms of setting the traps and the cameras and checking current state. And he reported back to me that he's approached 5 different providers and he's still struggling to find someone that has the capacity to do the work. So we've got to be quite careful about that. We don't want to compromise and go for any low quality work as a result of trying to get those suppliers in to deliver the programs. And the final one that I just wanted to mention is what we call the enabling. So that's all the bioinformation that we need to support the program delivery. So it's things like our monitoring and evaluation framework, our spatial biodatabase, our community relationship management system. I think some of these things, which I loosely refer to as infrastructure, have been underfunded for many years. So we need some of this basic infrastructure to make sure that not only do we have a cohesive picture of the work we're doing, but we have a cohesive picture of the changes that are occurring as well. And then with respect to next steps, I've spoken about the track upgrades and that's an important priority. I've spoken about the future communications and raising awareness of what the targeted rate is delivering for Aucklanders, the work to integrate the Māori outcomes, and then we're also, last year we went around all of the local boards talking about the regional priorities and what was being funded by the targeted rate. And we received feedback from the local boards that we're just assessing now with respect to what projects that they are putting forward that we can then look and see the extent to which they're aligning with regional priorities. So thank you, and Phil and I are very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mel. That's an exceedingly full run through. I just wonder, Councillor Filipaina, would you like to move the recommendation? And I'll just get a seconder. Thank you. Oh, mark off. So it's been moved and seconded. We'll open for questions. Councillor Walker, Deputy Mayor, and then we'll go around. Councillor Walker.
So just a question around the kauri dieback first.
Just don't forget to press your button.
And I've done that, and I've got 2 red lights showing, so I'm assuming that's all go.
Righty-ho.
So just on the kauri dieback program, I note the reference to the scrub and so on, and I'm assuming that goes to Trigen. The feedback that I've had is that, you know, when you do that, it's of limited application. That is evidence on the ground, you know, before and after, is that you've still got stuff there. I mean, this pathogen is incredibly difficult to control. Do we have evidence around that? Are we going to get some reporting around that? Given that if that's the case, there may be other methodologies that we need to apply?
Absolutely. So you're right, there are some limitations to the effectiveness of sterigene, and they're well known and now well publicised. There's research looking for better solutions, and there's information available on the National Cardiodiabetic website about research that's already been done, and I understand that the new science plan will be published showing the future research that will be done on that as well.
Okay. The other issue that I want to raise, I'm sure I've read it somewhere very recently, I don't know whether it's in here or not, is the real problem around the nurseries that are supplying eco-source material. I mean, I've been personally very concerned about Oritia native plant nursery that was, and maybe still has possibilities. Are we going to have any reporting to us around that? Because there are enormous quantities of plants that are required, obviously for the government's program, but also for ours. And the imperative that they be eco-sourced, and obviously one of those things goes to eco-sourced kauri across as wide a genetic pool as possible.
All our programs do attempt to use eco-sourced plants, and with regard to kauri, there are some specific rules that are going to be in place to protect kauri that are being, well, protect the modi, I guess, of kauri that are coming through the nurseries. So there'll be some quite strict guidelines about what can be collected, what needs to be collected to maintain that genetic diversity, and how they can be distributed so as not to accidentally spread kauri.
And the last question.
Sorry, Councillor Walker, I can just supplement that more broadly speaking beyond kauri. Last time I was here, I reported on one of our early projects, which was to support the community nurseries, to upskill community nurseries in terms of eco-sourcing. So that project has developed now to the point that there's the technical guidance available for the community nurseries, and there's plans afoot to form a network of community nurseries as well, which I think will be really useful for council, because when we buy the plants, ideally we're buying from the iwi and the community nurseries, so we're getting multiple outcomes.
Yeah, and the last question just goes to the relationship of what we're doing in this environment targeted rate and conceivably our climate change adaptation strategy, which is yet to be developed. And quite obviously, I'd suggest the acceleration in the susceptibility of our forests to fire, which is evidence elsewhere, and we know that you know, hotter temperatures are developing very, very quickly. Is that something that you're factoring in terms of what you're doing across these areas?
Yes, we're starting to factor that in, Councillor Walker. So it's beyond fires. Fires are a problem, but the biggest challenge, I think, with climate change for Auckland biodiversity is in the increasing in temperatures in the marine waters, temperatures and acidity, and what that will mean for incursion of what have been tropical pests largely, and how we address those. But across the board, there's challenges. We talked about challenges the other day with respect to some of the tropical reptilian and frog species that could be introduced. So across the board, there are challenges. But we've got some people involved in the development of that low carbon Auckland plan. And I think it's an area that needs a lot more fleshing out and plans to try and mitigate the risks.
Okay. So just to be clear, I've got questions, Councillor Cashmore, Casey, Simpson, Clow, And then speaking, Mayor Goff will kick off the speaking. And question from Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Madam Chair. First question, I've only got two. Is to you, Phil, and that is there any work being done between us and the Crown or whoever on trans-species shipment of kauri dieback? Like I've heard stories about this potentially that phytophthora could move into Kahaikati or Tarihaha or...
Yes, there is some laboratory evidence that other species other than kauri could be affected and potentially be hosts for kauri dieback, the pathogen itself. And so there's a we're not directly commissioning it, but through the national program that we support and help fund, there is further research being done on that.
Concerning. Second one's to you, Gail. It's about the community groups. So there's talk here about 600 groups, 120 so far being worked with in bits and pieces. Is that going well? And from your team leaders?
So was the question, is that going well?
Yeah, is it
That's
going?
quite a big question.
It is, isn't it? I'm hearing all sorts of different, from great to not so great.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably accurate. I think some parts of it are going really well in terms of the work I spoke about, which was bringing the community groups in to co-design with us in terms of the expansion of some of the funding that's available. I think one of the pieces of work that is just coming through now, but we need to then look at and implement, is a region-wide funding strategy. Because I think one of the things that's not going well is a lot of our grants funding is very reactive. It's based on an evaluation of applications as they come in, as opposed to us setting the priorities, working with Department of Conservation and the other large philanthropic trusts like Foundation North, for example, and getting a much more joined up picture about what the conservation priorities are for Tamaki Makaurau and how we use the grant funding to best deliver on those. So taking a more proactive approach. So that would be one of the things that's not, well, you could say it's not going well because we haven't got to that point yet. We've done the initial study. It's coming out in a couple of weeks' time, and we're hoping that will guide us to get to that end point, which is a much more cohesive funding strategy. So that would be an example of what's not going well.
And I think supplementarily that we've been stretched. There's the community groups have seen that there's all this extra money and want to get in amongst it, and that's completely understandable. But it takes a little while for us to stand up the extra staff to actually go out and support them, and as Gail says, to create the strategies that are going to support them. So I think we're on a great trajectory, but there'll be some people who are impatient, with fair enough, that they just want to get on, and we're doing our best to increase that capacity so they can.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a question about the last bullet point in your slide where you said that you're going to talk to the local boards about the work program. I just wondered if you would include the ward councillor in those discussions, only because we're the ones that have, moved the targeted rate. We've taken the heat or otherwise for that decision, and I think it's only appropriate that we should have the opportunity to input into the work program that happens in the wards that we're from. Yeah. Thank you.
Look, thank you for that suggestion, and I think that's a really good one. What we've done is we've gone round all the local boards and we've talked about the 9 programs of work and the 50 or so projects that we're delivering, and we've asked for their feedback. We've given them quite specific guidelines on regional priorities to make sure that we do spend the money on those. Things like, the most significantly ecological high value areas where there are existing community energy that we can support, those sorts of things. We've got, I think there was 100 project ideas that came through. This was just before Christmas. And we've looked at those and shortlisted some based on alignment with those regional criteria. But it'd be a great idea to involve the ward councillors from here.
With respect, Madam Chair, it's just the confirmation of that work program. My question to you is that should that rest with this committee or should it rest elsewhere?
I think it's a good question, councillor, and it's the kind of the the old chestnut that we sit with. What is local and what sits with the local board, and what is regional governance and what sits with us. And I think we are going to have to find a bit of a creative response to that, because councillors in their ward, and Councillor Casey makes the point very well and often, is that we are still ward councillors and we have a passion for the wards we represent, and we'd love to have a say on this. I think let's find a way through that. Chloe. Nope. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Gail and Phil. This isn't a criticism for me, because I think the work that has been done has been outstanding, and the Mayor and Councillor House and I went in the Kitty Falls a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, and it's a fantastic job. My question comes from some people in the Piha community who are questioning the value of the ambassadors. They say, oh, well, that money could be spent on upgrading tracks. They make some pretty disparaging remarks, but anyway, can you just give us a sense of what you feel the value is and how that's worked, and whether it's worth continuing or not?
I think the ambassadors have been really effective, and we've done some work to show that, I forget the exact percentages, but without an ambassador standing at an entrance, we get moderate compliance with the expectations that you scrub all the dirt off your shoes and use the hygiene station, whatever. With ambassadors, we get compliances in the high 90s. We still get a lot of people tuning up to tracks that don't know about kauri dieback. The Piha locals will clearly know about it, so they may feel that it's not necessary for them, but there are many, many visitors who don't understand. So we have tried to run a targeted ambassador program, which is over sort of end of November through to end of February, when we get the highest numbers on the tracks. So we're trying to balance out the cost of it with knowing that a track upgrade by itself is not effective if people are walking dirt all through that track anyway, and you're bringing dirt in. And so we've got to find that balance. And we think that we've struck a reasonable balance, but at the end of every season, we do a debrief and a work through and look for ways to improve. So we'll, be able to review those numbers.
Sorry, just following up on the ambassadors. Do we get a cost for that? Was that included in the question? Oh, sorry, was the cost? Did we find out how much the ambassadors are costing? I feel like Star Wars here. Good barrier though. Yeah.
We don't have that information with us today, but we can send it through to you.
Yeah. Okay, and that debrief comes at the end, because I know, for instance, a very mannerly and helpful young man was up our way in Hibiscus Coast at one of the regional parks there, but I don't know how many kauri are actually in that particular section, but certainly a very good quality of person. A couple of ambassadors I saw.
Thank you.
Just hang on, I'll just check. Was yours a question, councillor? Okay, we'll save that. we will save that for comments. We'll go to Councillor Casey, the Mayor, and then you.
Wanted to ask you about the pest-free warrants. In the report, one of the next steps is to increase the number. Can you give me an idea at the moment of how many operators have them, and how you're marketing that? Will they get to use a logo? They get to go on your list? Can you tell me more about that process?
So for the last number of years, between the Department of Conservation and ourselves, we've been managing this pest-free warrant program. It's been targeted at making sure that particularly commercial transport providers in the Gulf, so that's ferry operators and barge operators and people that take tours out into the Gulf, that kind of thing, that they are doing everything that is required to make sure that they're not accidentally taking pests to the islands. That's been voluntary. In fact, it still is voluntary, but under the regional pest management plan that we've proposed, and we're hoping for it will be adopted next month, it'll be mandatory for those transport operators. And that really sets out a whole range of expectations for those operators. The targeted rate is also funding a further expansion of the program a voluntary expansion of the program into other suppliers. So, for example, there'll be a New World supermarket that distributes online shopping out to Great Barrier. There'll be one distribution point, and we'll be working with people like that to make sure that when they're packing their goods, they're not accidentally taking plague skinks or other pests along. There'll be hardware stores the same, all those kinds of things. So, yeah, there's that balance between voluntary and mandatory. And yeah, it's been quite an effective program. They get to use the pest-free warrant stickers and things in their advertising and say that, you know, we're protecting the islands. And some organisations are very, very proud of those. I've had people come up to me who operate under a pest-free warrant and just saying what a wonderful program it is, because, you know, they get to tell all their clients about it, and it opens a conversation about with their clients about keeping the islands pest-free.
How many operators at the moment? What percentage do you think have got warrants, and who's still to come into the fold?
Thanks, sorry, I missed that part of the question. So there's the reason we're taking it from voluntary to mandatory with the transport operators is, although we've got 80-ish% of 80-ish, percent of the operators, there are still some that would like to bring into the fold that have been reluctant to join us. And there's not large onus on them, but we just want to make sure, in terms of the cost, we just want to make sure that they are abiding by those rules.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, first of all, I wanted to acknowledge Gail and Phil and your team. I think your team has remarkable enthusiasm and commitment, which gives me real confidence that you guys are out there spending that money in the best way possible. And I really want to acknowledge actually all the councillors around the table, but also the wider public, for supporting the targeted rate on environment protection. When I first proposed that, a number of you sceptically said to me, nobody ever votes to increase their rates for anything. And we demonstrated that that was actually quite wrong. By 2 to 3 to 1, both in our polling and in our submissions, Auckland has said, yeah, we want this, go get on and do it. And what the targeted rate and what your report shows the targeted rate enables us to do for the first time is to genuinely fulfil that role of kaitiaki over our environment. And I had the opportunity to visit 2 of the sites referred to in your report with Councillor Cooper and Councillor Holst. We went up to the Kitikiti Falls a fortnight ago, and it was great to see the quality of the track work, the fact that actually it's almost impossible to avoid cleaning your shoes when you go in, unlike the old days where it was a voluntary exercise, because you go through a gate and you stand on a pad that automatically shoots up the cleaning liquid. And I think we've got about 800 people a day on that track, and they're out there enjoying some of the most beautiful sights in Auckland, and they're doing it as best we can tell safely without the threat to the spreading of kauri dieback disease. And we just got superlative comments from the public that was out there using the track. And, you know, if you ever felt that it was worthwhile being on council, it's when you go out there and you see how people respond, and there's this amazing positivity about what council have done. That doesn't apply to all areas of our endeavours. The second, I want just to refer to the Hunua Rangers, and I went out to look at the Kokako recovery program. And I think 25 years ago, we had 1 breeding pair left. And it looked like Kokako would be extinct in that area and probably then across the whole of the Auckland region. Today, we've got 106 breeding pairs. And again, we're seeing the recovery of a species that we're driven to the edge of extinction. And when you see the figures post-1080, I've got to say, of the depletion in the rat population from up there down to practically 0, you see why it's so important. You know, if it's a choice between poisoning rats and preserving Kokako, or not poisoning rats and allowing them to be extinct, I think I know how most members around the table would feel. So I think this has been an area of exemplary action, And I think we collectively can be quite proud that we have actually turned a situation around and we're starting to recover the sort of Auckland that we want to see and protect and conserve our natural environment. So well done to the two of you, and if you can pass that on to all of us, to your teams. Thank you very much.
My comment was just first of all, a thank you for the work, especially in Kaipatiki. Unfortunately, with the kauri dieback that was found just after the long-term plan had been supported. So in one way, perfect timing to have the funding and the expertise there, but sadly, it would have been nice to have prevention rather than all the other work that was getting done. I do support what Councillor Simpson and others have said around just being able to celebrate it as a governing body member and the team around the table a bit more, as it, we all had to put in the work and the consultation and the votes to get this passed. It would just it's good to sometimes feel like we're a part of the positive projects and spending, as well as just getting money of people and those sort of high level plans. But I think you've probably undercooked the information in here, and it's probably because it's too detailed, but there is a lot more work going on across, I know in my community, but in other communities as well. And the groups that received the funding through that last round are extremely appreciative of that money, but also that is invested in probably being used 3, 4, 5 times over with what the volunteer groups can do with those funds that maybe would cost a lot more if we were having to contract that work out. So thank you very much. I think it's extensive, and within 6 months it's quite a huge amount of work that has gone on. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And look, I also want to echo the thanks to the team, but I think I also want to acknowledge when it comes to Waitakere Te Kawarawamaki in regards to that and the support that they've given to this, as you know, with the recommendation from last year. So I want to acknowledge Te Kawarawamaki and your leadership in regards to that, Chair. Also with Hunua, I want to acknowledge Ngaitai ki Tamaki, Ngāti Paua, Ngāti Tamaoho, Ngāti Whanonga, because as a result of their input around the Hunua, and especially around our pests, and I recall, Chair, the devastating news that we received around the 2 kiwi that had perished and were killed as a result of the pest in the Hunua. And I think this is why it's important to acknowledge the mana whenua, because this whole consultation with them is so important, especially with the mahi that we want to do around our park. So, Chair, I just want to acknowledge your leadership in regard to that consultative process, especially at the Waitakares, with the tracks opening. So, again, look, I just wanted to support you, so thank you so much. Kia ora.
I think that's all our speakers. I will put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried, and just echoing the Mayor's warm thanks and acknowledgement. Thank you, team. I'll just check. We've probably got water, and maybe our civil defence issues will be the big one. Why don't we deal with water, targeted rate, and then just take a 5-minute break, or do people need a 5-minute break now? I'll just check. Happy to do water and then a quick break, and then we'll aim to hopefully complete by lunchtime. Craig, over to you. Thank you. Warm welcome. Great hat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm delighted to bring a ray of sunshine to the meeting today. So before I start the presentation, I'd just like to acknowledge the Ngātai Te Tamaki presentation, because it's absolutely aligned to what we're trying to achieve in healthy waters. If I wanted to segue to today's presentation, I couldn't have arranged it better, because that relationship between the community and iwi is the only way we're actually going to achieve, and the governing body councils as well. the only way we're going to achieve great outcomes. And so it was a lovely segue into today. I'd also like to acknowledge Anna Nama from Watercare, who's here, because obviously the Watercare relationship and the work around the Central Interceptor is so central to a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today. So Anna can ask, if there are any questions of Watercare, Anna can deal with those. So I'll just get into the presentation. So we are pretty lucky, I guess, in that we've really hit the ground running with the water quality targeted rate. We have some major projects going on in St Mary's Bay, Macefield Beach, Picton Street and Daldie. And indeed, in respect to St Mary's Bay, we actually are well down the track with mediation with starting next Monday. And we're on target for starting that project in July this year. We've also been doing some work on how we're going to, you've heard me talk before about this concept around warrant of fitnesses for on-site wastewater systems. So we're just trialling our thinking in Piha South at the moment with a view to rolling that out across the region. We're also have been able to put some additional funding into the Waterways Protection Fund in relation to the Wairau and Papakura catchments, and also the work we're doing collaboratively with Watercare around the whole safe networks. You've heard me talk about that before. It's also getting really down to forensic examination of pipe networks, because that's the only way we can actually get to some of the problem children that we're dealing with. So we've got a number of things that are going on, a whole lot of ageing infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. Can't overemphasise the criticality of the collaboration, and that's working exceptionally well, and particularly the relationships with Watercare and Auckland Transport. I've got to put a plug in for the fact that while I've got a captive audience, that we are looking to take over more responsibility from Auckland Transport in the stormwater space. I think it's fair to say that we've got the skin in the game and they haven't. And so that's going to be in relation to things like culverts, waterways, roadside drainage, and generally enhanced sediment removal from the catch pits. Because that's a key element. If we don't capture that material in the catch pits, guess where it ends up? It ends up in the receiving environment. So Watercare is well on target for its Central Interceptor project. I think they're due to be awarding the contract for memory on the 14th of March. I think there's a function at the Manukau Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is the contract signing. We're already in dialogue with the Watercare team delivering that project, and they're very keen to work with us around how we get maximum benefit out of the Central Interceptor. You've heard me say this before, but the Central Interceptor is really building the big motorway, but we need the arterial network to support the motorway, and so that's the piece that Watercare and Healthy Waters are working with so closely. The work we're doing on Daldie Street is on target with the America's Cup. Very, very close now to, I think if we haven't got our consent today, it's coming tomorrow, and so that will enable us to construct the extension to the Daldie Street outfall, which will have a big impact on the current sites for the bases for the America's Cup. And I can't overemphasise the importance of the mana whenua relationship, and I think Gail has touched on it already. I think the neat thing in Healthy Waters is that we have a sustainable procurement team that's up and running already. And the most exciting part is the relationship we've now got with the Crown. The Crown are actually really keen to make some traction in this space. The fact we've got a team that's up and running is very exciting, because we're able to get some additional Crown funding to help us with some of our programs. So I think that creates a wonderful opportunity to do something quite innovative in that space. So this is really just maybe just going into a slight little bit more detail, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much. I already mentioned the fact that we put the additional funding into the Wairau and Papakura. A lot of work's going into safe networks. We've got known problems at the moment in Glen Innes, Takapuna, Red Beach, Piha, Meadowbank and Langhome, to name a few. They're all areas that we are looking at very closely at the moment. The septic tank and on-site wastewater program is a big challenge for us, because at the moment there's around about 40,000 properties that we've captured in our database. Just the sheer act of establishing the database in the first place sounds straightforward, but it's not straightforward because we need to make sure we've captured all of the systems. So we're well on target to be kicking that off in the next month or two. And not only have we done some work in Piha South Lagoon, we've also done work in Little Anura, Waiheke as well. The contaminant reduction program is an interesting one in that we've identified a number of areas where we have significant stream erosion problems. And we've learnt a lot over the last few years of how to deal with stream erosion. And I can assure you it's not planting flaxes in the stream banks. In fact, that's one of the worst things that's happened historically is the planting of flax in stream banks. The first thing that happens when you get a big rainfall event is because of the nature of the flax, the water removes the flax, removes the flax ball, which are shallow rooted, and then you've immediately got a major erosion problem. So the way we go about planting our stream banks is absolutely vital. It's only one part of the sediment issue, I acknowledge that, but it's a critical one to get right, and we've now got some really neat advice which is going to change the way in the future we go about planting our stream banks. Gail has already touched on this, so I'm not going to repeat it. Suffice to say that we're working very, very closely with environmental services. So this won't be a Healthy Waters initiative. This won't be an environmental services initiative. This is an initiative across the whole environmental space. We have to be joined up in this space. For us, the risks are a little bit different in that these are, because our program is a little bit more mature and developed, maintaining that ongoing collaboration, it's up there as a risk, but it's also one that I think we're mitigating extremely well at present. We're on target in relation to the consenting issues around America's Cup. And also we're finding with the contractor capacity, the key thing there are having good asset management plans, having early conversations, and with the new contracting resource that's coming in for projects like water care, it actually does offer up some opportunities to be a lot more proactive into how we work in that procurement space. So I think there's a couple of things going on. Not only is the engagement with the contractors, but also the way that I think we need to bundle our works together. We need to, particularly in the big infrastructure space, we need larger contracts with more incentives for the contracting community, subject to good performance and subject to good rates, to get more work off council, because that way they can make the right resourcing decisions up front to how to run their businesses more efficiently, and that benefit will flow through to council. So in terms of our next steps, obviously I mentioned before that we're doing this work on the contaminant hotspots, and that work is due to be finalised in the next month or two, and that will enable us to prioritise where we're going to be putting our monies into our stream rehabilitation works. Getting our wastewater, on-site wastewater up and running is going to be a key for us. And obviously in the last bullet point, local boards and community groups, and implicitly our ward councillors as well. And we will obviously share that information, because I think in this case the outcome are ones that everyone is going to have no difficulty signing up to. And that's basically the presentation, and very happy to take any questions.
Lovely. Okay, we've got Councillor Sayers, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Kathy Casey and Councillor Watson. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the update. My one question was around that new planting methodology on the streams. Does that include, or has there been an issue around the maintenance, being able to get down there and maintain those plantings once they're there? Sometimes my observations are we can lock ourselves out of getting to them to weed and maintain. Is that part of the methodology, or am I being too specific there?
No, not at all. At the end of the day, we don't regard a planting program successful until the plant has survived for 5 years. By then it should be able to fend for itself. And so when we look at a planting program now, the actual responsibility with the contractor is actually in place for the first 5 years of the life. And that includes getting down and doing all of that detailed maintenance work. So what we're finding at the moment, there's a number of, and I don't want to get too specific, but there are a number of rain gardens, for example, in the region that that, with the benefit of hindsight, could have been better designed. So we're looking at bringing in some methodology from the United States around green infrastructure. So not only stream banks now, but also looking at how we provide for that first flush treatment, because it's that first flush treatment that has all of the contaminant material in it. That's the important stuff. Stormwater as a whole is not the problem. It's the dirty stormwater. It's that first half hour of the rainfall. That's the bit we need to capture. That's where we need to apply the smart thinking to deal with that, particularly the road runoff and the more urbanised runoff, as opposed to the issue around rural sedimentation, which is a whole different set of issues.
Madam Chair, if I may, just touch on the other question that I probably had, and that was around your comments about this runoff into the culverts, and I'm thinking probably the rural network now, and how we're seeing stuff getting flushed down, particularly into the Kaipara, and so is that, I'm assuming that's the holistic view you're taking right across the whole region, including that unsealed network, which at the moment those culverts and swales aren't probably quite up to scratch.
Correct. So the conversation we're having with Auckland Transport is not just an urban conversation. It's an urban and a rural conversation, and I think it's one that's well overdue to get nailed. And so we want to get as much into the next annual plan as we can, and then with a view to having this completely landed in time for the next LTP.
Madam Chair, if I may, just slightly political, I guess, and that's in terms of the cooperation you're getting back from the other CCO, Auckland Transport. Is that moving in the right direction?
Absolutely. I think Auckland Transport recognise themselves that we've probably got the subject matter expertise within Healthy Waters to better manage this aspect of their business. So I think with all the changes that are occurring in Auckland Transport at the moment, it's a change that actually their senior management supports as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, in some respects, Craig, you've covered it. I just wanted to make the same point as I had made over the environment targeted rate. But I also congratulate you on the Auckland Transport relationship. I think that's vital to the overall success. So I think that's really good. But yes, I just think your last bullet point needs to be amended, and look forward to hearing how that will be signed off. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Can you just go back a slide from the last one? One of the risks is appeals. Have you had any community groups or individuals signal appeal on any of the projects so far?
There are a number of appeals in respect to the St Mary's Bay Macefield Beach project. So as I said, we're into an accelerated mediation process with the Environment Court. That starts on Monday. And we're hopeful that when we sit down with the parties, have a detailed face-to-face conversation in front of an independent mediator, I'm very hopeful that will result in a good outcome for us.
Any risks of any other an appeal on any other projects that you're looking at?
Oh, look, you can never ever say with confidence and you're in a consenting process that there aren't going to be appeals. The quality of the consultation is obviously in the way that you share that information with the community is designed to minimise that risk. But invariably on a big project, it's not uncommon to have appeals. But I'm confident we can work our way through and get out the other end. We need the consent for St Mary's Bay by June this year to stay on target, and I'm confident that we'll achieve that outcome.
Question on the safe networks, Craig. Nice to see the North Shore beaches and Hibiscus Coast beaches coming under that program. I just wanted to really gain a little clarity as to what comes out of it at the end. Hopefully not fecal matter, but the solution. So, for instance, you give the example of Red Beach, where we've had this testing where something's found. When we discover the source in practical terms, what happens?
So it's going to depend on the nature of the source. If it's wastewater contamination, that will probably indicate a leaking wastewater network, for example. But it may well be of a canine or avian nature, which really our ability to do anything about it is pretty limited. The good news about avian and cavian source material is the risk to human health is quite different. And so not only are we looking at the engineering of what's happening with the pipe networks to try to understand better what the nature of the results are with the modelling and the monitoring, is also looking at better quality science to better size that risk. The New Zealand science at the moment doesn't differentiate between an enterococci from a human source or a bird source or a dog source, and to my view, that needs to be sorted because they're not the same risk to human health. So not only is this a question around infrastructure solutions, it's also some better science, and I think Auckland's going to be leading the way in this area. To the extent that it's our Safe Swim is our risk-based approach to the community, I think we can make decisions ahead of the science agencies making decisions, because historically it takes a group of scientists years and years and years to ever agree on anything. And if we've got information, I think council should be bold enough to share that information with its communities early, and it's only a risk-based approach at the end of the day. So if we believe the risk has changed because of better understanding the nature of the contamination, we need to provide the community with that information.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question. In terms of communication with the community, obviously in a number of locations there's a huge awareness of the Safe Swim. People are hypersensitive to beaches getting shut down, etc. Do we have any plans to actually communicate in a little more detail, as you alluding to there, with the community so people have a sense of what we're doing?
Look, absolutely. As you know, the Northern Region Surf Lifesaving is one of our key partners, for example, when it comes to Safe Swim. We're also working very closely with all of the ocean swim organisations, and that's been a really good relationship. And obviously working through the local boards and the various community groups. And so I think we've got pretty good level of community engagement with respect to those situations.
So that's the end of the questions. Any comments people wish to make? I'm happy to move the recommendation. If there's a seconder, Councillor Filipaina, Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging me again. Just another thank you on this. I've seen the work on the ground for the water quality targeted rate, and it has allayed people's fears a bit of, especially issues on the eastern beaches and Takapuna. The Safer Networks program has been sort of a forensic look at the whole system, which hasn't been easy, and there's not simple fixes, and there's lots of issues with private infrastructure, which I think is our next challenge around how we encourage or get people to upgrade their own private infrastructure that we can't do. But I've seen very quick work around the public bits and fix-ups and things we would never have been able to see in partnership with Safe Swim and others. So there's a long way to go, but I have seen a big change, and just people understanding where we're at, and the fact, that it could be years, but people know that there is serious work going on in the space, and the things are getting addressed quickly, and the work at Lake Pupuki as well around more natural algal blooms and the science behind that. And once again, allaying people's fears. So I think that's all people want, is the fact that we are doing the work and actually checking out what they feel is not good for a world-class city or an international city to have these issues. But I guess we are one step forward. But once again, around making sure that governing body members are brought in as much as possible on those local issues, because I think it's all good that we're on the same page and that we know the great work that everyone's doing. So thank you.
I really do respect the work the team's doing. And thank you for acknowledging the work that's been done on the periphery of the core of Council's commitment. What I have to say is more about, as a ratepayer and as a proud Aucklander, at what point will the community encourage healthy waters to begin encouraging our governing leaders, if not our movers and groovers, to lift the standards of stormwater runoff, as an example, regardless of the activity we're proposing, my view is, notwithstanding the activity, until those standards are addressed to some degree, and I say this very politely, there is an intelligence, honest part around. Really appreciated that, but it's doing nothing to grapple with the core of the receiving point of just continuous rubbish when it rains. And so I encourage our officials to be brave and hold the hands of the leaders to have this honest conversation to lift the standards, because until that's done, all we can do is accept the fine work being done by our officials. Kia ora.
Comments? Oh, Sharon.
Sorry, Councillor Stewart.
Sorry. Thank you, Craig. You've done a lot of really good work, especially at our way with healthy waters. So really want to thank you for that. One of the things that I've just been talking to Sarah Sinclair just this morning of civil defence, that quite often a lot of the issues that we have with, with flooding and everything and stormwater, we're really the ambulance trying to fix everything up. What I would like for us to do is, when we have infill housing in our patch, Howick, Pakuranga, a lot of the older part of Howick, Pakuranga, most of the houses are not connected to stormwater. So that was one of the reasons why we had a moratorium on a big part of Howick and Pakuranga not building in some of those areas. That's why with the unitary plan we were very concerned, Councillor Quacks and I. But with the infill housing, that's just creating more and more problems for this, what's happening. So one of the things that I know that you had helped us with, we had some quite serious flooding. People hadn't lived in their homes for many, many months, and it was because of the infill housing. So because there'd been some upgrading because of the infill housing, we'd actually had some of the new infill housing had to connect to some of the older stormwater. And I would like to see that's something that the council really, really pushes, that all new infill housing that goes in, that whoever the developer is has to actually connect into at least 4 or 5 houses to help with this upgrade. Because what we've been told, all this infill housing, we're upgrading our networks and everything, but unless they actually connect, and they actually connect into the properties that haven't got connections for stormwater, we're not going anywhere, we're not doing anything, and we're just going to continue with this problem. So thank you.
No more comments? I will put, Councillor Cooper, comment?
Yeah, it was just a question around the septic tanks. It's 40,000 old systems, or the total advanced and old systems?
That's our early indication of the number of private systems there are in Auckland. I think that number is going to increase a little bit when we finally finish the exercise. So they would be a variety of ages all the way through from.
Okay, and so in terms of the requirement to replace old systems, currently there isn't one. Is there an actual requirement? Because that's contributing a lot to our water quality. Is that right?
So we're going to have to look at a risk-based approach, because depending where you are in relation to the coast, the impact that your non-performance might be having on the receiving environment will be quite different. And bearing in mind this is a major expense for a person to go to, or a householder to go to replace a system. We're talking something in the order of $20,000 to $30,000. So there's the issue of identifying what the problem is, but also how we may work with that ratepayer. Because that's a massive amount of money for someone to find. And so how we go about helping fund those initiatives. If we're serious about achieving the right water quality outcomes, we may need to look at a mechanism for how we can support the capital cost of that, maybe through an individual loan to that property owner or whatever, because otherwise we may run the risk of people not buying into the program in the first place.
Just sorry to follow up. Do you think there's a regulatory obstruction there too? It's $10,000 for the resource consents about that, as well as the cost of the system. But is there any? Do you think there's anything better we can do in that regard, in terms of the way we process?
We have to come up with a smarter typology where for different standard typologies there's a standard consent that can be issued. I think for someone to spend a $20,000 upgrade and another $10,000 for consent fees is just, natural justice says to me that's not fair, that's not right. So we have to be smarter about the way we can standardise different scenarios, where you are in relation to the ground type, maybe the slope of the ground, adjacent to the coast. All of those might be put into a type 1, type 2, type 3, type 10 and have standard consent conditions for 95% of situations, which will cut
there is
that
still a lot of
cost
bespoke
dramatically.
issues around where you are, how much land you have. So, okay, that's something we can work on.
Correct.
I will put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And thank you, Craig, to the team. There's a lot of excellent work happening here. Members, we'll just take a 5-minute adjournment, and I do mean 5 minutes, and then we'll endeavour to finish the rest of our agenda. So we'll just stand adjourned for a few minutes. Thank you.